If you've ever had questions or have considered doing fasting, then this video is for you, especially as it relates to this particular study in breast cancer patients. Hello, I'm Dr. James Bogash, publisher of Modern Health Myths, and today you might want to take a seat for this one. It's going to be a little bit longer than most. We're going to talk about fasting. This is actually quite a comprehensive topic and something that a lot of people do wrong. As an example, skipping breakfast because you skip breakfast does not justify as fasting and will most likely put you in a worse scenario than you think. So first thing we're going to cover is a little bit about some of the different aspects of fasting and where things started. We could probably start with the understanding that we take in way too many calories here in the United States. And our bodies are designed to survive starvation, because 100,000 years ago, our biggest challenge to survival was starvation. So our bodies are very adept at fighting off starvation. That's why every human is at risk for diabetes, because diabetes is the opposite end of the spectrum from starvation. So those people that are most prone to diabetes are actually the ones who would survive if there was a global famine. So so we start with looking at just the overall thought of calorie restriction without nutrient restriction. So the idea that we take in too many calories. Some people have, some researchers had said the idea that most research looking at mammals have found that calorie restriction without nutrient restriction, so I describe that as your 1,200 calories a day comes from broccoli and not a Big Mac value meal. So lower calories, higher quality. And those, in almost every study looked at, calorie restriction extends lifespan in mammals. There are some people who have gone even further, saying that excess calories shortens lifespan. So definitely something to consider. The idea that we take in way too many calories is the basis for all aspects of fasting. So in general, calorie restriction without nutrient restriction is the lifestyle that we lead. Everything that I put in my mouth, I need to judge the amount of value versus the calories that something has. That's why I've never been a fan of drinking milk, because we're drinking our calories. There's almost never the value in drinking our calories than there is from eating our calories. The next step from there is a very low calorie diet. So if living a lower calorie diet is a good thing, what about a short period of time of a very low calorie diet? This is ideas looking at things like the not CGF, I'm blanking out on this one. The big diet that was popular for a while, it's kind of gone away now. 500 calorie diet given with, I'll think of it when I'm not trying to think of it. But so the idea of a very low calorie diet in this particular diet plan, which was popular for a while, it wasn't the hormone, which was a pregnancy hormone. It was not that. It was the very low calorie diet that was doing the work. So we've seen diabetics put on a very low calorie diet, so 400 or 500 calories a day, and the insulin dependent diabetics become free of insulin within a matter of a week. And that's how powerful that can be with when we start paying a lot of attention to what we put in our mouth. And that, when you're eating that low of calories, there is no room for junk food. So everything has to be the highest quality food. So that's kind of the next step of fasting. Then we started with, well, not everybody wants to live like that. So what about alternate day calorie restriction? So we do one day, it is 400 or 500 calories. The next day is ad libitum, so basically as many calories as you want to take. And they found that was just as effective as keeping calories low. So we could start alternating our days or picking a couple days a week just to remind our bodies that we can function on lower calories, designed to keep our bodies efficient with that. Stemming from that became, if you want to go the full length, things like water-only fasting, where people would fast for a short period of time. Generally, water-only fasting is not a good idea to do past maybe a week, week and a half, 10 days with a few exceptions, because your body starts to catabolize itself. We need amino acids, we need things to detoxify, and our body's going to start breaking itself down if we go too long. But there have been studies on water-only fasting that have tremendous power. One of the ones I always point out is a blood pressure study done on water-only fasting, and the average blood pressure drop in the study was 60 points. There's not a medication on the planet that can drop blood pressure 60 points, and yet water-only fasting was powerful enough to do this in these patients. But again, that's not a long-term thing. That is a short approach designed to be very aggressive for managing certain things. Then we get into what's probably the more popular is something like a time-restricted fasting. And there can be a lot of different flavors with this. It can be usually, like, some people may go sun up to sundown, so you don't eat after a certain period of time. You could look at a period of time during the day. Somebody may only eat for 4 hours during the day. There are eating breakfast until maybe about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I remember reviewing a study that stopped that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and they found even more of an anti-inflammatory, immune-stimulating benefit on fasting stopping at 2 p.m. rather than 4 p.m. So generally, that time-restricted fasting, our bodies seem to do pretty well with, but that is not a matter of just skipping breakfast. It needs to be a very well thought out, well planned approach to cutting back on your calories. And without a doubt, most of all of those time-restricted feedings keep us from eating calories later at night, or later in the evening, later at night, which our bodies generally do not do well with. So there's a lot of different approaches when it comes to fasting or calorie restriction. There is absolutely no doubt that this is a very powerful tool for longevity, for fighting disease. But what about fighting cancer? So here's something to consider. Malignant cells lose the ability to act like normal cells. So that means that when we start cutting back on calories, our normal cells, all of a sudden, they batten down the hatches, they tighten things up, they become more efficient, certain enzymes starts driving. Those cells move to protect themselves. Cancerous cells, doesn't happen. So what happens if you combine fasting with something like chemotherapy? So you now have your normal cells, the non-cancer cells, are protected because of the fasting. It's kind of like a castle under siege. They're protecting themselves, but that's not happening with the cancer cells. As a matter of fact, they may actually become more voracious, more hungry, because cancer cells are generally very, they require a lot of, you've heard the term of sugar feeds a tumor, and that's true because tumors are very ravenous when it comes to needing sugar to continue this massive growth spurt. So it would make sense to combine fasting with chemotherapy, because that is the best of both worlds. You're protecting your cells while leaving the cancerous cells more vulnerable. Which brings us to this particular study, which was a small study done in about 129 patients, women with a certain type of breast cancer, that were given a 4-day, so basically the cycle was 4 days of very little calories, around 200 a day, plant-based, so soups, broths, tea, and then they would cycle off of this. So basically they'd have 1 day of 4 some time in between, and they do a second cycle. The women in this particular study who were followed through with both cycles and were very diligent with what they were and were taking in had a drastically increased response to the chemo. Small study, and so something that should definitely be reproduced, but we never have talks in chemotherapy about using diet, especially calorie restriction, as a tool along with chemotherapy for managing cancer, but it just makes complete sense. Now, we're not talking about not eating because somebody's not hungry from the chemo. Keep in mind also the dexamethasone, the steroid that they used to stimulate hunger, was not used in the fasting group. And so, yet there weren't any differences. So we didn't need the steroid because the diet helped with that. But this isn't about just not eating, which can happen with chemo. You get nauseous, you don't want to eat. These people were still feeding themselves, but these very low calorie, but it was still nutritious, plant-based. They were getting nutrients to help their body function. So again, small study, but man, it just makes a lot of sense to be using tools like this along with traditional chemotherapy, but it is not an approach that is typically even thought of by mainstream oncology. So this video went a little long, but as always, I will put a link to the study in the comments section. And please like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs this information, and subscribe to the channel.